Right, people, the Premier League season is underway and Pep's up to his old tricks again. He's gone back to his first season 7 years ago to find the way to keep himself one step ahead of the competition, and he used it in this game against Chelsea. But why did he do it? We're about to tell you that. But firstly, I just want to let you know I'm safe, I'm okay. It is a different background. We're working on a project that I'm desperate to tell you about, but I can't do it just yet. So don't worry about that. Let's get back to Pep and why he dipped into his coaching manual to beat this Chelsea team. So this is a game between Liverpool and Manchester City back in 2017, March 2017. And there are some clues from this screenshot in front of you here. You've got Fernandinho in here, but it's not what you think. And then so much more. But I'm going to move it on. Let's move it on, because what's important here, and I'll tell you what, I'll give you the clue, I'll give you the answer. Man City went direct in this game against Chelsea. They played wide and they played very direct, and they wanted to get to the byline. Pep Guardiola said that himself. And these moments from this game against Liverpool and the whole setup of Manchester City in that season, a season where they didn't win the league, it only came into fruition the season after. Two key players when it comes to today, the game against Chelsea, the 2-0 victory and how they were able to get over the line there. And it's these two players here. Back in 2017, you had Leroy Sané and you had Raheem Sterling. For many, this was the most exciting Manchester City team that there has ever been, because they got at the opposition, they got to the byline, and they wanted those pullbacks. And that's what Pep wanted in this game. But does he want this long term? So to go back to this game back in 2017, and this was just the best example of it. First of all, great advantage played by the referee. Isn't that enjoyable to see? But secondly, the important thing is, again, width. And what that does is it creates half spaces. Now, if we go back to that moment here, you've got Fernandinho really high up. He's a centre midfielder. That's understandable. But in this game, he played right back. We'll come back to that, because that was a key part of this game as well, with some really, really impressive performances and so much fluidity and duality to the players on the pitch for Man City and Chelsea as well, who of course we'll talk about as well. But Raheem Sterling dropping deep here. And that shows that even the principles way back in the day, you could pick up different areas of the pitch. And that's exactly what Man City did. But importantly, a little bit more direct and looking to utilize the width of the pitch. And you can see from the passing networks of both players in terms of the passes that they were received, that both players played really, really wide. This is Doku in the first half specifically, staying on that left-hand side. Man City for years have liked to work down that left-hand side. But the switch over to the right-hand side and creating those spaces, creating those channels that you always see in positional play were absolutely crucial. And you can see that in terms of Savinho and the passes that were played to him, often from players on the other side of the pitch. But the other player that's really important here is this RCM. RCM means right-sided centre midfielder. Now, that's Rico Lewis. But Rico Lewis, if you look at the formations, was playing right back. So what was he doing, and how were those two wide players affecting the game and allowing Man City to get the victory against Chelsea? Well, the crucial thing is that it's about channels, okay? And when you have these wide players, what they do is they create half spaces for other players. And famously, Pep Guardiola, he likes to have those players in those half spaces. But the way that's done is in several different ways. And today, not using Kyle Walker and crucially not having Rodri on the pitch, he looked to do it in a different way. And the important thing was Doku, in this instance, would stay nice and wide. And as I say, you've generally seen Doku on the left-hand side. And what it would do is it would bring Cucurella out to him. It would isolate him one-on-one, and he himself could try and get to the byline himself. But the gap that it created right here was absolutely crucial. And it then comes down to having players that can see the space and attack the space. And in Rico Lewis and Bernardo Silva, you have two utterly wonderful players that work in slightly different positions. And coming back to that game all right at the beginning here, Fernandinho was playing as a right back in this game. But when he understands that there's space to be taken up, especially those half spaces, he goes and he does that. And if you go back and watch the highlights from this game, you'll see several different moments when Fernandinho, as a right back, makes those underlapping runs and gets himself into the penalty box. And there were several different moments where they made it very, very difficult for them. What I will say is Cucurella did very well. We're going to talk about some of the players that look at home in this new Maresca setup, and then some players that I've got huge questions on. So stick around for that. But this is a great example of it where Rico Lewis... Have I said Rico Henry? If I have any time during this video. Have I? No, good. I can do that sometimes. He makes that underlapping run. Let's move it on. Another one. This is another great example where Rico Lewis, all I can think of is Henry now, is actually already in that half space. This guy's supposed to be the right back. And that's the big difference, I think, now as opposed to back in 2017, is that you have a Man City defence that kind of plays as a back three at all times, whereas previously you maybe had a bit more of a back four. But always it's about those 5 players utilising the width as much as possible. But they've now got an extra body in there because you've got people, again, we talk about duality, being able to being hybrid, right? Being able to be in 2 different positions. You've got someone like Akanji who can come and play right back and be comfortable on the ball. Again, you're isolating that defender in Kukurea. This is actually an example of Nkunku coming back, but I think what they were looking to get at was the idea that maybe Nkunku wouldn't get back at all times, but it again makes it difficult. And I think he probably would have been told, you need to fill in that gap, because if you don't, there are problems ahead. And this is another example of actually Rico Lewis, again, sucking in 3 players this time, and then does a little bounce pass back to Doku, and Doku can then either put a ball back to the back post where you've got Haaland there, or get to the byline and get those pullbacks. And coming back to that little nugget from Pep Guardiola, he said that's what he wanted. And you just wonder with this team and with Pep Guardiola, what he's done, and we did a video on this a year ago, is that he kind of leads the way, and then you start to see all these big defenders, and then he'll change it to the next iteration, which is maybe coming back to having this width. Savinho has come through the door. He is someone that likes to get to the byline. He's a player that likes to attack his defender. Doku does the exact same thing. And having those players in that width, it then creates that space. But you have to have players that are smart enough to move into those positions. And a great example, of course, is the goal and Bernardo Silva. Because, again, when we're talking about players being able to do 2 things, 3 things, 5 things, Bernardo Silva is exactly that. Here he is dropping deep to pick up the ball in the first place. Look at Rico Lewis, by the way. He's not in your normal right-back position. He's already moving into that lane there. And if we move it along, you can see he's actually dropped here. But you have those 5 once again, and that width with Savio nice and wide here. And that makes it difficult for that back line. And as we move it along, the ball gets played to De Bruyne, who again sometimes plays a bit more centrally in those half spaces, sometimes moves out wide. And Bernardo Silva doesn't stop. He's just so complete. It's absolutely frightening. That creates a bit of an overload for Caicedo here. And as we move it on, the next thing, and I think this is the big comparison when you think of Chelsea and Man City and 2 teams that want to play positional play, is you've got to be able to do it quickly. And being able to play those passes quickly is a huge part of it. And that's exactly what happens. What Doku does do is Caicedo kind of gets done here, thinks he's going down to that byline. Instead, he cuts inside. You've got technical players in those half spaces. Bernardo Silva being really, really confident here. And again, we'll show him again. Rico Lewis, there he is on the edge of zone 14, ready to get involved. Savinho holding that width as well, making life really difficult for that Chelsea back line. And as we move it on one more, again, sometimes it's that speed of thought and that cohesion. And I think that's the difference between these 2 teams. We'll show you Chelsea in 1 second, but it's one little pass to Haaland and he's able to get that goal. But that comes from, a moment of brilliance in terms of the pass itself, but also having bodies high up, having bodies in between their defenders, and also utilising the width so it stretches that Chelsea back line as much as is humanly possible. So this is Man City against Chelsea, and you can see from that width of those 2, which obviously you don't see initially, and he's taken the 26 number. What do you think about that as well, guys? Let me know how you feel. But the width in terms of what they do when they get on the ball, you can see it from both those players. Rico Lewis as well, really interesting here. And what's so great is those underlapping runs. Instead of that fullback getting round, it's kind of coming through and utilising that half space. Able to pick up the ball in those normal right-back positions, but also coming into central areas as well. And as you can see, lots and lots of touches in the penalty box. He made an incredible run in the second half where he got the ball, turned, drove, pointed exactly where he wanted, and then got himself on the ball. And if we go back to that Manchester City-Liverpool game, we can see Fernandinho, exactly the same kind of thing. Getting the ball as a fullback, understandably, but coming into central areas and picking up the ball there and getting himself in the penalty box as well. And then if we think about these 2 players, you can see Sterling wide, but these 2 obviously switched during the game as well. Well, certainly Sterling did, but when the substitutions happened, Sane offering that width as well. Very different. And look, out of possession, we're always looking to stop Chelsea centrally, which was partly down to the way that they attacked, but with the ball, looking to get that width. This is a different kind of Man City. But will we see it against every single team? I'm not totally sure, but I do feel like Man City do have a bit of a plan here, maybe for the likes of Arsenal. And this could be a weapon that could be used in that game. If you remember that game, the two of them cancelled each other out so much. And so to have this extra weapon of going, right, we're not going to try and go through because you're trying to do the same thing. We're going to go around, get to the byline and create those high XG chances. That could be massive against Arsenal later down the season, because the last 2 seasons, it's become a bit of a shootout. So if it does again, these are the weapons that Pep wants, and that's why he's always one step ahead. Let's talk Chelsea. And look, it's going to take time for Chelsea. I think that this is a bit of a free hit, if you know, and a 2-0 victory. And that sounds terrible, but like, it's not the end of the world. I think if you get slapped 5, then there's a lot of noise. But I thought there was some good moments. There was good endeavour from the team. They looked to understand and implement the plan, and the plan was really, really interesting. When it came to the game, there were some players that I thought did really well. One being Cucurella, as we touched on earlier. I thought he was really, really impressive in that role. Tenacious, but also got on the ball down that left-hand side. There was a nice triangle there in theory. And I think it's one where this guy here, Enzo Fernandez, I think him and Cole Palmer, there's a partnership there, but not in this setup. I think what we might see is that in those big games, when you want that bit more solidity in midfield and you're not playing against a low block, I think this is what we might see. We might see Enzo Fernandez as a player who can kind of get on the ball. You're going to play on in transition, and it might be one where you look to play Nkunku. Is Nkunku's destiny to be a left winger for this Chelsea team? I'm not really sure. There's a moment here where Nkunku gets on the ball here in a nice area, but he doesn't really want to go to the byline. Rico Lewis does, again, brilliantly defensively. Had a fantastic game for them. But when I see Enzo Fernandez in these positions here, I think, look, he might have a long-range shot, fine. But in terms of that bursting run into the box, not sure I totally see it. I actually like the idea of him as a deep-lying playmaker. But what we did see in this one is that he played so much higher than a lot of people had thought. We said in the video about how they would set up that he might be that guy that's a lot higher up the pitch. Can he evolve to be a player that can get the output that Dewsbury Hall got for Leicester City last season? That's what I think Maresca is going to want. But I think it's understandable that you wanted a bit more safety in that midfield. The problem then became, I didn't feel like these two players in midfield, Lavia, I thought did right. You know, obviously he's a young guy. But Caicedo, I think both of those don't feel totally comfortable in the middle of midfield in terms of picking up the ball, especially when you've got so many bodies around you. And I'd love to see Enzo Fernandez getting on the ball, spraying those passes. And when I talk about that partnership between him and Palmer, I think, my theory is that I think if Palmer is here and Enzo Fernandez is here, those two have a great time together because he looks to play that pass to him all the time. But that's the way that partnership and that relationship for me works. Enzo getting the ball to Cole Palmer. The other way around, I think you come into problems there. We'll move it on. And Nkunku, we've spoken about that in terms of that width and where he's going to be. But what was interesting, actually, if we go back maybe a couple more, is the positioning of Cucurella. And there was a lot, again, it was sort of like one went, one stayed. And we saw that with Cucurella. He stayed generally. And Gusto, who I thought was fantastic, again, will have to evolve into that new role, but I think he's got the energy to do it and get up and down. He showed that width. And actually, the game kind of started, or the formation almost, it actually turned into a two up top, and you actually were working on a bit of a diag. It was a bit asymmetric from that point of view. And Nkunku, that then allowed him to make those diagonal runs in. If we move it along, we can see that little triangle between the three. And again, it's about cohesion. It's about little moments because you've got some great runners there. So Cucurella getting the ball here. This is a moment where actually, if he opens up, and I think if he's Cole Palmer in this instance, for example, I think he opens up. I think he can drive with the ball. He can play a first-time pass. He can open up the ball and play a perfect pass there as well. I think with Enzo Fernandez, he's one where he might come back or he's going to sort of stand and make a pass. In this instance, I was a bit disappointed with him because I thought he could play that pass first time, and that was kind of the point, to have him in that half space against a good team. But against a different team, I expect him to be much lower. I think he'll play in a different position. And I think there are still a lot of questions when it comes to this team. One person who's going to get lots of opportunities, but here's my hottish take. Cole Palmer will not score the same amount of goals this season, in my opinion. But he will score some absolute screamers, and his season will be slightly, or the output of it, I think, will be slightly dictated by the players around him. And if there are some changes that are made, because when Cole Palmer gets the ball in these areas, he's going to drive inside. Gusto's going to provide that width. And that's how Fatawu created 32 big chances for Leicester City last season. You want him in those areas because he's absolutely wonderful in picking out those passes. But who is he picking out those passes to? Nicholas Jackson, his movement, it can be better for me. And there was a moment where Gusto's got the ball back here and he's in the penalty area for ages. I'm screaming at the telly, and Jackson just needs to go to the back post so he can stand it up. He doesn't do it at any point. He literally had 20 seconds to do it. I know you know that moment if you're watching this video. So when Cole Palmer gets the ball in these areas, what is he going to do? And the player that's going to receive it, can he play that pass? Absolutely. Can he drive into this area here and then take a shot? Absolutely. But are those players that are around him, one, I will say, is that you're going to go into a lot of traffic there, but also a player of his quality has got the vision to go and find those players. So he may, one, become the pass before the pass, or two, those passes and his expected assist this season might be really high, but will the output come from the players around him? That is what I'm interested to see. I don't think you need to get upset if you're a Chelsea fan, and I think you should be happy if you're a Man City fan because you've got an extra weapon, and Pep has gone back into his old coaching manual and picked one out. What do you guys think? Will Pep stay ahead of the rest of the pack again this season? What do you think of Savinho and Doku? Will that be the future for this Man City side? And Chelsea, can they figure it out? Will Maresca be able to work out and smooth off those edges? Let me know.